Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. The topic for today's webinar is Resilient Solar and Storage Training, introducing a free course for community serving facilities. And this webinar is being presented by Clean Energy Group, and we have an excellent panel of guest speakers with us today. But before we get to them, I'd like to go over a few webinar logistics. As you may have noticed, we are now using Zoom webinars. Thank you for your patience as we get used to this platform. If you have any feedback for us, we encourage you to provide it in our post-webinar survey or via email. All attendees are in listen-only mode, so your webcam and microphone are disabled. The chat function is also disabled. You can submit questions and comments via the Q&A panel. We'll be saving 15 minutes after the webinar, after the presenters for a Q&A. Automated captions are also available. And finally, this webinar is being recorded. We will email you a webinar recording within 48 hours, and it will also be posted on Clean Energy Group's website at cleanegroup.org/webinars. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to our host for today, my colleague Seth Mullendore.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. So before we get into the presentations for today, just a quick intro for those of you that are not as familiar with Clean Energy Group. We're a national nonprofit organization, and we work across the country to help ensure affordable, reliable, clean energy for all. And we work across a number of different focus areas: climate resilience and community health, distributed energy access and equity, energy storage and flexible demands to unlock more clean energy, and fossil fuel replacement and transitions to clean energy. Next slide, please. One of our projects that's very related to the course today is our Resilient Power Project initiative that's been going for more than a decade. And this project is specifically focused on enabling greater access to primarily solar and energy storage for community serving facilities that provide services to historically marginalized communities, low-income communities, communities of color. As part of that program, on the next slide, we have what's called the Technical Assistance Fund. This is a foundation supported effort to provide both one-on-one assistance from Clean Energy Group staff, as well as small grants that can pay to engage an engineer. And we have a number of partner engineers that we work with to provide a solar and storage pre-development feasibility study for a resilient system, so a system providing backup power. So if you have a project that you're looking at and you serve historically marginalized communities, let us know. You can find out more on our website under the Technical Assistance Fund. Okay, next slide. So with that, we are going to kick things off. We have a great lineup of speakers today. We're going to start off with Nick Crucial and Eric Hangen. They are going to give you a little bit of intro about the what and the why of the course. I'm going to talk a little bit about how Clean Energy Group was involved in the development of the course. Then Chris Keast, who acts as a technical consultant for the effort. He has a ton of experience in the solar and storage space. He created a lot of the content. He's going to tell you even more. And then we're going to round it out with Becky Regan, who is the CEO of Capital Link, to talk about some of the finance portions of the course. So you can find out more about all of our presenters today. We're going to share a speaker bio document. So if you want to learn more about the speakers, you can reference that. All right. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nick and Eric.
Okay, thank you, Seth. And hi, everybody. Thanks for coming to the webinar today. So I work at the Center for Impact Finance at University of New Hampshire. We've been partnered, Nick's organization and my organization have been partnered for 6 years now, developing trainings in climate finance for people who work in low-income and underserved communities. We started back with some instructor-led trainings for community development lenders and solar lending, and we've added a whole bunch of courses on green home improvement lending and multifamily decarbonization lending. And we've also started building courses in partnership with the Department of Energy and Lawrence Berkeley National Lab for developers, so developers of community solar projects. This new training course, which is free and available to all, online. It comes out of that same lineage. And just wanted to thank Wells Fargo Foundation for its funding support that enabled us to put this together. Our audience for this course is a little bit different, and I think I want to go back to talk about actually my own motivations for, when we were writing this grant to Wells Fargo, why I thought it was so important to build a course like this. I have a lot of friends and family who live in a low-income rural community in Puerto Rico that was without power for almost a year after Hurricane Maria. And one of the things we did was we took an old, just the community kind of working together, and with money that we raised literally from bake sales, we took a community center that had been in existence, and we turned it into a resilience hub with solar and storage, and it became and also water treatment. And it became a place where people could charge their cell phones, they could keep their insulin cold, they could get clean water, they could cool off for a little bit. And it really makes a difference to have that resilient power. When a community is without power for a year, you really notice what a difference resilient power can make for your community. And so we started thinking about, well, who needs to know about these kinds of projects, and who needs more help to be able to move these projects forward. We started thinking about groups who have community serving facilities. So schools, churches, childcare centers, food banks, health clinics, the grocery store, pharmacy in your community, or maybe, you have a community center like we did in Puerto Rico that you wanted to turn into a resilience hub. But places where that value of resilience is extra high. We're not just putting up solar panels because we want to save on electricity, although we can do that too, but we're really trying to help these critical facilities be able to keep serving their communities, even if there's an extreme climate event that happens. So that's our motivation for the course. If we can go to the let's see, a couple slides down. Let's get down to the two more after that, where you get to the course objectives. There we go. So what we're gonna this is a not a long course. This is designed for somebody that if you're that you're the director of that health clinic, or you're a staff member at that child care center or at that food bank, and you have questions about, well, could this project kind of work for this type of project work for us? How could it help us respond and keep our services going after a storm? What does it even involve? What are the physical components that we have to put out there? What do you mean storage? How does that work? How do we know whether our building is a good place to do this? How should we design the project? Does this pencil out for us? What kind of money do we need to be able to put up to build this project? Are we going to get that money back? Can we find a developer or an installer who we can trust? Can we manage the risks? Those are the kinds of questions that this course is intended to help you if you work at an organization that has one of those kinds of community serving facilities, be able to move forward with the project. Then also for lenders, we have some extra content at the end to learn about how you can lend to these kinds of projects. We hope that as a lender, you'll also enjoy the first parts of the course, because as a lender, you also run a critical community facility. And that's one of the other learnings that we took away from Hurricane Maria, was how important it was for like savings and loan cooperatives to be able to continue operating, for example. So you also have a critical facility yourself. You might want to think about this kind of project for your own facilities, but then we're also going to give you some extra content on how to think about you underwriting these sorts of projects. So that's the course in a nutshell for you, and I will turn it over to Nick with more details on how you can access this thing. So Nick.
Thanks, Eric. Can we go to the next slide, please? Hi, everyone. My name is Nick Crucial. I'm with Inclusive with our Center for Resiliency and Clean Energy. Eric talked a lot about the partnership, but it's just really exciting to have this course after a couple of years. 2019 is when the center was launched and started doing some of these trainings. So in terms of the course, right, Eric talked a little bit about the purpose and the audience, but it's going to prepare you to evaluate and create plans to implement solar and storage for building owners and managers primarily. You're going to get started figuring out whether this is the right choice for your facility, what kind of technology you might need, and how you can make the finances work. In terms of the format, right, it's an online self-paced course, and it can be completed totally independently. There's 4 main modules and that bonus module for lenders, and you can really set the pace on that. So if you want to do it all at once in one afternoon, technically you can. It might sink in better if you break it up over a couple of weeks, but all the content in the course is going to remain available to you as a reference point in the future as well. In terms of the audience, again, Eric kind of covered that a lot. Building owners, managers, staff people with a very vested interest, right, in thinking about the resiliency and the renewables. It's focusing especially on community serving facilities. So you're thinking health centers, community centers, childcare centers, schools. But owners of other building types can also benefit from this. And there's no, requirements to be one of those people to enroll in the course. If you're curious or you think it might benefit you, sign up. You can get in there and review the content and see if it does apply. All the course activities are going to focus on evaluating a particular building for a potential resilient solar project. So there's sort of an immediate real world application. And in a few minutes, you're going to get some previews of the great info and tools that we're sharing in this course from the different team members who developed them. And then registration, this is an exciting part. And Zareen, if you don't mind dropping the link in the chat, you can just submit this registration link, give us a little bit of information about you, your email, and our team will enroll you within the next couple of days. So it's that easy. Also, I just want to plug that the course is available in Spanish, and there's an option to select that in the sign up if you or someone you know would prefer to go through this course in the Spanish version. And we'll definitely be sharing that link out afterward as well. All right, I think that is my part here. Seth, I think you're up next.
Great. We can go on to the next slide. While we're doing that, just to plug, if you do have questions, things that come up, don't be shy. We've got a lot of people on here, so please submit your questions in the question box, and we'll get to them afterwards. So, Zareen, if you go to the next slide, please. Great. So I'm just going to talk about a few things that Clean Energy Group helped contribute to this course. One thing is our understanding solar+storage. This is answers to commonly asked questions about solar PV and battery storage. This is a kind of a guidebook document for solar and storage. We first, Clean Energy Group first developed this resource back in 2020, and we updated it with lots of new information, tax credits, and updated cost information, technology information for this course. You can see in the table of contents, I won't run through that, but these are basically structured as questions that we polled our vast network of folks in this. And these are the most commonly common questions that came up. This is all also available in Spanish, and it's basically meant as a supplementary resource. So kind of almost a textbook for the course that complements a lot of the video content that is in it. Next slide. Just shows a couple of examples of what's in the Understanding Solar and Storage. We tried to make it very accessible to folks. It's not meant to be a highly technical, really deep in the weeds. There's some of that in there, but there's also a glossary of terms and lots of explainers to help people understand. This is just an infographic that talks about factors to consider when planning a solar and storage system, which the course goes into in depth. Next slide. Another example of one of the figures and one of the things that walk through in the guide is just a very simple, like, how do you find out how much of a battery storage power rating you're going to need for your system? So this talks about what kinds of critical loads, talks about critical loads as well, what types of critical loads, what things might you want to have powered during a backup, during a power outage, and how do you determine how much battery power you're going to need in order to both be able to run all of them at the same time and over an extended period of time. So next slide just shows another resource. These are excerpts. I'm not going to go through all the language here. This is just showing you what's in another resource that we had, which is a solar and storage, like basically getting started checklist. So it has a few simple steps to how to get started with a project. Look at your utility bills, seek out experts, research your utility policies and interconnection standards, and again, evaluating critical loads. This is also available in Spanish. This is just one of the many, many resources that are included in the guide that can be helpful for folks that are just getting started in this, or folks that are further along that need a refresher or a structure for how to approach a project. Next slide, please. So one of the videos that we contribute to this is assessing the solar potential of a building. Next slide. There are a number of different ways to do this. The video goes into like, why do you even want to perform a solar potential assessment? So just getting an idea of the constraints you're working with. What does your roof look like? Do you have shading? Are there structures or are there obstructions? Do you have an old roof that may cause a problem? And exploring other options as well. If the rooftop's not enough, can you do a carport system or ground mount? Next slide. There are a number of tools that can help you do this initial assessment before you go out and start talking to someone that you might have to pay for their services. One of the tools that the tool that's used in this video, one that I like and has been around for many years, is PV Watts. This was developed by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory of NREL. And it's a very simple calculator tool. You put in your address, you get to see your roof, and you can basically draw out what a solar system might look like on your roof. And then it will give you an estimate of annual production. So you can tell, okay, how many kilowatt hours will I use in a year? And how does that compare to the energy that I'm consuming on the site? Can it cover all of it, 50% of it? Can it oversize it? And how will that fit into my resilience strategy? So I'm going to stop there. Those are just a little example of some of the things that we contributed, but I'm going to turn it over to Chris now. And Chris really developed a lot of the content. So he's going to dig in on a lot more of the things that are in here.
Thank you, Seth. Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Keast, lead consultant with CK Sustainable Energy Consulting. And it's my pleasure to walk you through some of the content I developed for this course. My focus was more on technical aspects of solar energy storage, but today I'll focus more on the simple reasons for choosing these types of systems for energy resilience. You know, answering the questions like the what's, whys, and hows of resilient energy systems. Thank you. So before we go on, I talk a lot about energy resilience in this course. So let's start off with a quick definition of energy resilience. So the Department of Energy defines energy resilience as the ability of the grid, of buildings, and of communities to withstand and rapidly recover from power outages and continue operating with electricity, heating, cooling, ventilation, and other energy-dependent services and appliances. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, pardon me, energy resilience is becoming more important as increasing power outages occur due to disasters triggered by climate change. And you see some examples here, such as $128 billion disasters from 2011 to 2020, pretty telling. Also more category 4 and 5 hurricanes in the 2010s than any other decade, at least on record. And then as we've all possibly seen or heard, there's increasing frequency of flooding, heat waves, and large wildfires. So all these pose risks on communities that can be severe and far-reaching. Some examples of these risks are damage to infrastructure and housing, public safety hazards such as increased mortality and injury and mental health impact, putting a strain on emergency services, long-term displacement, including permanent relocation, as people are forced to move to areas with fewer resources or different job markets, along with community fragmentation that disrupts social networks and weakens community resilience, as well as poses environmental and health risks like water contamination, disease, and hazardous materials released into the environment. Next slide, please. Thank you. So why do we care about solar and energy storage in this context? Well, aside from them being sustainable and renewable sources of electricity, they actually aid in providing energy resilience. In other words, they're a big part of the solution. So to borrow from one of Clean Energy Group's excellent diagrams here, solar systems convert sunlight into usable electricity through solar photovoltaic or PV panels that can be used to power appliances or to charge a battery to use that electricity later, or it can be sent back to the power grid in some cases. So I won't dive into the specifics here, but the course goes deeper into the areas of what components and equipment are used in solar and battery systems and how they interact, the safety profile and risks of using the different battery types and chemistries. And it does focus on batteries specifically. Concepts and terminology like size in kilowatts versus capacity in kilowatt hours, historical building energy loads versus critical loads, what incentives and tax credits and rebates are available to help pay for these systems, and other ways that solar and energy storage can be used outside of just during power outages. Next slide, please. Thank you. So solar energy systems help achieve energy resilience in some of the following ways. So they help provide businesses with operational uptime or continuity, allowing them to stay open during those outages. They can help power community shelters during outages, like Eric mentioned earlier, offering necessities of life such as food and shelter, along with phone charging, refrigeration, heating and air conditioning equipment, and servers and computers. They can also power medical hubs capable of operating life-saving equipment, preserving medication, water pumping, sewage pumping, etc. And they can also power communications hubs with emergency authorities, among others. And finally, they offer a clean, emissions-free, long-term, reliable, and sustainable source of energy that can both save money and keep the lights on. Next slide, please. So this course discusses several different ways of finding the best solar and storage system to maximize the benefits for your building. Seth already mentioned PV watts, and there are several other tools that you'll learn about in the course as well. One in particular is an Excel-based tool I call the Simple Solar+Storage Calculator. And this is a quick, easy-to-use tool that tells you how big of a system you'll need for your building and your situation. Oh, can you go back there, please? Sorry. So as you can see in this little snippet image of the calculator, there are a few simple inputs that are needed, including the region the building is located, and what's the current monthly utility bill spend and electricity usage, if you have them. What are the critical loads to be powered during a power outage? And note that there actually is a separate tab in this calculator that helps you estimate your critical loads if you don't already know them, which is pretty helpful. The solar system size and generation, if you have them. These are actually optional inputs and only recommended to be used if you've done some work on this already, such as using PV watts or a different external tool. And then how many days you want your system to power your critical loads during an outage, which I call the days of energy autonomy. And then optional inputs for grants, rebates, incentives, as well as for the value of energy resilience. So as I said, many of these inputs are optional. So if you don't have the information, then the calculator will make best guess estimates for you. So the calculator then will automatically and instantly give you an estimate of the solar system size and the annual production if they weren't input originally, as well as the battery storage size and capacity. It will also provide estimated electricity bill savings and the number of hours or days that the system can provide power during an outage. So a brief disclaimer that, it's important to track down or decide on some of these inputs as accurately as you can. In other words, that realistically applies to your building or situation in order to get the most benefit from the calculator. One example is having at least 1 month of utility bills on hand that you can reference. But again, if you don't have all the information, this tool is still very helpful as a first step toward sizing a system. So I recommend checking it out. Next slide, please. So the different ways we can obtain value from solar and energy storage are financial benefits, like saving money on electricity bills by using less expensive solar electricity instead of the grid electricity in most cases, taking advantage of incentives, tax credits, and rebates offered by governments, utilities, and others, as well as property value increase. So in addition, there's also non-monetizable benefits, which are less tangible, let's say, but still very much a value add. And these include things like energy resilience, which values the qualitative aspects I mentioned earlier, such as keeping a business open during an outage. This value could end up being very high, since keeping the lights on could have virtual infinite value in some situations, especially during a prolonged power outage. And then things like emissions reduction from burning less fossil fuels, among others. Next slide, please. So finally, the course gets into some other areas to give you a better understanding of solar and energy storage projects, including things like basic system design for long-lasting, reliable, and high-quality setups, a downloadable version of the simple solar+storage calculator I just described, also a sample solar and battery permitting plan set package, which is a useful reference tool. And then we have system interconnection and net metering processes, which discusses how systems are connected to the grid. Also, what does the installation process look like, as well as the operations and maintenance, or O&M, of a system. What financial pro formas, installer agreements, O&M contracts, and financial agreements look like, with samples provided, as well as how to find an installer for your project and how to vet installers to pick the best one, and plenty of other tools, tips, and resources along the way. So in closing, I believe this course is a great springboard for anyone wishing to learn more about how solar and energy storage provides resilience, as well as offer the numerous benefits to buildings and communities. Last slide, please. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope to see you in the course. And with that, I will pass it on to Becky.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. Well, hello, lenders. We have a last module in the program in the course that we'll touch upon today, but hopefully you have a chance to go through if you're interested in more details about solar lending, which is not certainly a brand new program for banks or CDFIs, but we'll talk a little bit about how to do that for commercial facilities and programs. My name is Becky Regan. I'm the CEO of an organization called Capital Link. We also have an affiliate called Capital Fund, which is a CDFI, and we provide solar lending for community health centers. So we are a nonprofit organization that provides capital planning, consulting, and data for health centers across the country, also known as federally qualified health centers. 2 years ago, we created a partnership with our national organization called the National Association for Community Health Centers, and also a solar developer out of California called Collective Energy. And we call that partnership the CHARGE Partnership, or Community Health Access to Resilient Green Energy, hence CHARGE. And we finance and put together development, kind of turnkey developments for FQHCs across the country. So for health centers and other commercial facilities, you focus on operational resilience, reduced disruption, and avoided costs. So thinking about those commercial facilities as tenants if you're a lender. So you're thinking about, as a lender, what is the tenant's ability to repay the debt? So next slide, Nick, please. So commercial lending and community facilities, I think you can just kind of click through here, Nick, to show the bullets. There we go. Can be financed by loans or power purchase agreements, also known as, or also can be known as energy service agreements, which think about kind of a buy versus lease idea. And there are different reasons why you would do one versus the other, provide one versus the other. PPAs and ESAs have become more competitive or more popular, particularly for, in my expertise, health centers where they're lower upfront costs. So it makes the solar more accessible, but there are pros and cons to an ESA versus direct lending, which I'll describe in a moment. A building owner, so your borrower might prefer a direct loan for an installation, then that would allow them to own the system outright and then take advantage of tax incentives like the IRA incentives or direct pay incentives for a nonprofit, or state incentives, et cetera. So as you may be on the course here, local and national banks have solar lending programs, and also CDFIs, credit unions for residential properties more than commercial. One thing to, excuse me, and then for lenders, what we think about is how can the repayment terms match closely to the monthly energy savings. So when we talk about underwriting, we think about that kind of thing. We think about, is the 100% loan to cost possible, what's the security? A UCC filing is more ideal. Oftentimes a building has an existing mortgage on it. So the borrower, or you as the lender may choose not to have security, or just file something that's more simple instead of a second mortgage, and just file a UCC on the equipment. One of the other things to think about is whether or not the loan terms require a payment over of the rebate. Let me say that differently. If the rebate comes from the federal government, the ITCs, do we require that to be paid to pay down the loan, or can the borrower keep that? Is it optional? In other words, you might, as a lender, think about that as equity in your project. Next slide, Nick. So I mentioned a little bit about financing structures, a direct ownership, where normally you would, as I mentioned, have monthly savings to repay the debt, or third-party financing, again, an energy service agreement that would pay the debt. For the second case, the third-party financing, or ESA, a third-party developer installs and owns and then maintains the project, and the developer then sells that solar power that's generated by the host or the panels to the other party for a rate that is less than what they could pay the utility. So that would be the purpose of doing that. And then it's that sale of the energy that repays the debt, with the structure being documented via an equipment lease. So that power purchase agreement or energy service agreement. There are pros and cons to either one of the, kind of like a car, a lease versus buy decision. One of the advantages of in my example, the buy decision, or having a direct a mortgage or ownership, is that as you pay off, many loans might be a 10-year fully amortized loan. And so when you pay that off, when that is paid off, I should say, the cash flow starts to cross over, and the benefits are received by the owner after year 10. So there's more benefits, excuse me, to the owner under that scenario. However, on the ESA or PPA, so that has a longer period of repayment and oftentimes a lower monthly payment, just like a car lease, you may that may be very beneficial and preferable to the community facility, but you never get the full benefits of that as the way that you do for a under the kind of buy scenario, if you will. So one of the other things or considerations is that in a state without a higher cost of power, the ESA generally does not make as much financial or economic sense. And then one thing with the ESAs to think about is if there's a purchase option after a 5 or 7 year period, depending on how that is ultimately financed in the background. Next slide, I think the last slide here. So just a couple of other things to think about. And when you, the other speakers have talked about what energy plus storage, solar plus storage, the benefits of doing that. Storage is more expensive. So obviously if the community facility is considering those things, storage or just solar, of course, resiliency comes from the batteries. So if we're looking to reduce disruption, or in the case of a health center, avoid costs like lost medications or vaccinations that can be extremely, as in tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars if there's a major disruption in energy and they lose refrigerated vaccines and medications, then that is an avoided cost that if you had a battery that could pay off like that. So that's one consideration and why you would want to make sure that there's that added resiliency through that battery. There are rebates, state rebates in particular for storage, so that you might not otherwise get those. For underwriting considerations, it's not like any other, it's not unlike other, lending. Their contracts, their counterparty risks, what's the borrower's ability to repay through predictable cash flows. I think in general, when we think about underwriting, think about while you have a tenant and their business, if you were doing a real estate loan, you would look at the predictability at the term of the lease, those kinds of things in terms of cash flow. That's an underlying repayment source, but really you're underwriting the system. So what are the projections that the solar developer has made? What has the tenant paid or borrower paid in their utility costs over the years so that you can make a comparison? What will they be in the future? Ideally, of course, that even when you include the costs of the system, you're ultimately getting to a point where your monthly costs are either equivalent or after payoff are, obviously you're looking for the facility to have the benefit of all the fixed costs of solar, of the energy that they're purchasing, and then that resiliency, which would reduce their ultimately potential losses. Considerations to close, obviously think about when your loan comes into place. Is the project completed? Has interconnection been completed? Are there warranties on the panels and battery? Are there reserves or the battery or the inverters, replacement reserves? At what point, at which during a 25-year term of the life, I should say, of the system, have you underwritten some replacement reserves? And then the O&M contracts, you want to make sure that those are in place and strong. And then the other folks talked about incentives and renewable energy credits. Obviously, when you're underwriting, you want to take into consideration, again, if those are coming into the facility, to the borrower, how you're applying those either to your loan or how you're allowing the borrower to hold on to those from a cash flow standpoint. Nick, that's it for me.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for the presentations. If folks could come back, show their cameras again. We have a number of questions I'm going to address. We had a bunch of questions, I think, for folks that had joined late. This course is free, so you don't have to pay anything to take this course. I know I can say for the Clean Energy Group resources like the Understanding Solar and Storage Guide, a question came in, can we use this? Can we share it? We're happy to have these resources reshared as well. And that guide, if you're not looking to take the whole course, I hope you do, but that's also available on Clean Energy Group website. So you can go to there or just search for Understanding Solar and Storage and find that. And we're happy to have people use it in whatever way they want. Some other general course questions that came in though, and I think these are probably for Eric and Nick. One is, where can folks find information about the additional courses as well, and are those courses also free?
Yeah, let me answer that, Seth. Thanks. And I was just typing into the chat here a link for folks. So I answered Veronica's question about that, but I see David had the same question. So maybe I'll stick that link in there as well for everybody to see. But so the courses for lenders that we have through the CIF-inclusiv-green and solar lending training platform are all available at the web link that I've answered in the Q&A. So that includes green home consumer lending, commercial solar lending, and multifamily solar lending. So those are 8-week-long instructor-led courses. They are very intensive and they are for lenders only. We need to see that you are a skilled existing lender if you're going to get into one of those courses. Generally speaking, going forward, those courses will not be free. They will have a tuition unless you are a lender affiliated with a greenhouse gas reduction fund awardee who is using some of their technical assistance money to have us provide courses to their members. So you could inquire with your, if you are affiliated with the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund awardee network, such as Inclusive or Native CD-Fi Network or OFN or others, you could inquire with your network about what their plans are to support you to go to our classes. Otherwise, you'll pay tuition, and you can inquire with us about that. We also have a series of courses for developers. So let's see, it was Rupak had a question about whether this this resilient solar and storage course was available for distributed generation developers to share with their clients. And I just wanted to share that answer to that question with all of the attendees, because it is like, we really want you, like if you're a solar developer who works with health clinics or schools or childcare centers or health or what have you, we want you to share this course information with your clients, because one of our goals is to make life easier for you, that you will have a more educated customer to work with who's ready to move faster, and you spend less time answering all their basic questions because we answered them for you in this course. But also, if you are that kind of a developer, like you are building solar arrays for community facilities, we have a training course for you that is competitive to enter but is free through the U.S. Department of Energy Community Power Accelerators. We have a new course that will be launching late April, early May, which Chris is actually working with me right now on developing, called Commercial Solar Development for Community Facilities. And so that will be coming out. It'll be an 8-week-long instructor-led course. And so that course, I'll also put that link in the chat. Sorry for the long answer, but there was a lot of stuff people wanted to know.
Great. And just related to all of that, I know for this free course, there is no limit to how many folks can join that per organization. Did any of the other ones have limitations as far as how many can join, or are there specific ones that there may be limitations to? I know you mentioned the DOE one may have some limitations, the one you're currently developing.
Correct.
And just, this should be a quick one. How long does it take to take the course? Is there a range of time that is estimated for folks to complete the Resilient Solar Storage course?
Yeah, our best guess is that it will take between 4 and 6 hours to go through all the content once. If you really dive deep, it might take you longer. If you're just skimming for certain things, it'll take you less time. But those 4 modules plus a bonus module are going to be 4 to 6 hours of your time.
Great. A question for Chris. Do you have tools or recommended methods to arrive at autonomy length, backup power length, which would have an impact on the energy storage size?
Yeah, I saw that. Good question. Yeah, the tools I'd recommend primarily, there's one called Reopt, which is a tool offered by NREL. It's a free online tool. And that actually is a little more advanced than the calculator I was showing you, but it does a much more rigorous estimation. So I would definitely check that out. There's a paid tool also called Homer, Homer, Homer Pro, that does similar things to Reopt, but it's a paid tool. Those are the 2 best ones I can recommend. Seth, Eric, any suggestions on any others?
No, you know, I would say it's tough. And as far as recommended length, like that just depends on the circumstances, right? You know, we have folks that say our outage are 2 hours. That's what we want to do. And then you've got people that like in the Northwest that are looking at Cascadia subduction zone. They're like, we need a month or we're not going to have access to anything. So it's really dependent on your situation as far as the length.
Agreed. Yep. Yeah. Usually it's not one of the parameters you kind of have a goal seek toward. You kind of use that as one of your inputs, right? Like you said. So, but those tools will help you sort of iterate on the autonomy with the other inputs that it offers. So yeah.
Great. So question is probably for Becky, but others may chime in too. What are you seeing for the ability of municipalities to actually get paid through direct pay if they want to own a project, particularly considering the current environment?
Yeah, Eric might have a better answer. I mean, I know it's possible. We are seeing more, not, the direct pay related to nonprofits being able to install a project and then file their 990s or their tax returns and then get the direct for the investment tax credit, the 30% back directly. I do know municipalities are eligible to do that, but I have not really been involved in any having done that. Eric, do you know, or anybody else on the call?
I'll just say this is a rapidly but everything in the political environment is changing pretty rapidly right now. So sort of stay tuned on it. But let's see, how can I do this? I'm gonna put a link into the chat. Maybe for you, Seth, that you can put out into the regular chat or something, which is, so for folks interested in direct pay, whether you're a municipality or a nonprofit, I think one of the best resources out there to really understand how that space is evolving and to get some good technical assistance on utilizing direct pay is through Lawyers for Good Government, which has set up a direct pay, or also called elective pay, resource page that I have sent to Seth to put in the chat. So I would sort of monitor that really going forward to understand how this situation is evolving. Right
Yeah,
now, it's still possible.
Yeah, I see. I just went there. Yeah, Zorene's the only one that can post to everyone, but she got that out there. So that's it. We're all set. So thank you for that answer. And this is an interesting question. Is the purchase of used equipment allowed and or covered in this course? That's just an interesting question. Chris, I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
It was not directly covered, but I think a lot of the tools and learnings can apply to used equipment as well. I mean, you just have to be careful about warranties, right? I mean, I go into a little bit of depth on warranties, so I just keep use that information and apply it to used equipment, basically, which would be a lot different. Aside from that, yeah, I guess buyer beware. You never know. Yeah. Not a bad idea,
Yeah,
though. I mean, the panels will last over 20 years. So if they've only been in operation for half that, let's say, and that's when they're being sold, or even less than that, then yeah, they should still have some useful life left. Batteries, I would be much more careful about. Same with inverters. They have a 10 to 12-year lifespan. So depends on the component and where you're getting it and what conditions it was put in, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I'll just I want to reiterate that. I know we saw after Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, there were donated batteries that didn't work because they had been discharged to the point where they couldn't be used anymore. So just that buyer beware, check warranties, make sure that you're getting something that you can use. Otherwise, it ends up as an expense instead of a benefit. Okay, is this course beneficial for someone working in community energy? I think certainly for community serving facilities, but I think this may be talking about shared solar, perhaps.
Yeah, if you're thinking about community solar, we actually have yet another free course that for developers of community solar projects called Introduction to Community Solar, and then a really intense self-paced course that's like multi-week, but also free, called Foundations of Community Solar. And both of those courses are again available to you through the web link that I chatted that has that's our Community Power Accelerator educational programming link. Lots of courses, a dizzying array of courses.
Great course for every need, for every person. Are there education opportunities to highlight the importance of envelope improvements and equipment efficiency improvements that could help get more ride through of the limited energy storage PV production? So yeah, Chris, maybe this is to you. Does the course get into if you use things that use less energy, then you can last longer in an outage?
That's a really good point. We did not go into too much depth in that subject. However, it is highly recommended to have an energy audit done before you install solar and storage if it's feasible. There is financing available for that. But I mean, the general idea is to make your building envelope as efficient as possible so that you're consuming the least amount of electricity before you size a solar and battery system. That would be my takeaway, but I don't think the course goes into too much detail on that specifically. There's a little bit of information there, but it's not like we devoted an entire module to that. There might be a slide or two in one of the presentations. Yeah.
Great. A couple of terminology questions came in here. Just wondering why the term solar plus storage is used as opposed to microgrids, and what exactly is the difference between the two, or there's reasoning behind that. I don't know, Chris, if this is one that you want to tackle.
Yeah, they can both operate the same way, in my opinion. Microgrids can be any source of electricity, right? It could be a generator, it could be a windmill. So yeah, I mean, they are somewhat synonymous, but a lot of the information that a lot of the content I developed is also around grid tied solar and storage too. So you can sort of stack the value, right? The value stack electricity bill savings plus the energy autonomy value. So that's kind of why we were going with the solar and batteries predominantly, which can also be a microgrid. So yeah, it depends. Microgrids aren't always grid tied though. So that's the difference there. Yeah. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, no, I think it does. And just the emphasis that this is being developed around solar and storage, whereas, like you said, Chris, a microgrid can be anything. There's a lot of traditional fossil fuel generators, and that's not to say that there's not a need for those, but the emphasis here is on solar and storage as a cleaner alternative of on-site power. Yeah. There's some people chiming in with some research I'm trying to dig through here. Would this course be helpful for school facilities developing a solar-based resiliency facility for the community? I think that's a big yes on that one. I think that, yeah, I'm seeing a lot of nods. I think that's
no
that's like the target here, right?
Like, oh, please take this course. Right. And there was a related question, Seth, about, does this course require my organization to be a financing organization? And no, right? Resilient Solar and Storage, like, we hope you'll take it if you're a financing organization, because you also have critical community facilities as a lender, and we want you to know how to lend to these projects. But this course is for you if you work at a food bank, a school, a church, a health clinic, grocery store.
Okay, and the question, are the IRA tax credits and rebates still viable? So, I mean, I think as of right now, the answer is yes, but we don't know the future. That I will say, that there has been bipartisan support for the tax credits, the investment tax credit, and the next phase of those as well. So they seem safer than some things that seem more uncertain right now. So,
yeah, and rebates are typically managed. They can be managed at the local level too, right? So those ones might be more secure at some places, in some locations, right, than others. The IRA is more federal, so that's subject to one decision making process versus many.
Yeah. But yeah, the solar tax credit is still available right now, so. And for the rest of it, it will be available for all of, at worst case scenario, will be available for all of 2025. It would take an act of Congress for it to go away.
Yeah, and I think another definite yes. Would this be a good course for this person who's the energy manager for local government buildings? I say that's another big yes. Okay. There's one specifically, just Becky, just a flag one specifically for you here at the bottom with some contact information. But I think we've run the gamut of most of the questions that came in, unless anybody else saw something. We only got a minute left, so I think this is a good time to wrap things up. Thank everybody for presenting. Hopefully this got everybody interested and excited about going to register for the course and telling all your friends about it. Eric, did you want to chime in?
There's one last question here. I registered for the course. Should I wait for an email to be received, or how do I access the course immediately? Nick, do you want to talk to that?
You're going to get an email, I'm going to say by the end of the day on Monday, but hopefully way before that, hopefully tomorrow, to give you direct access to the course.
Great. Well, thank you to all the presenters. Zareen, do you have any final thoughts for folks?
Yes, we have some other webinars coming up. You'll get some more information about that in our follow-up email. You'll get a link to the webinar recording. You'll get all of the important links that we shared in the chat today, and you'll get information about our other upcoming webinars. So thanks again, everyone, for attending. Thank you to all of our speakers.